All right, so I'm going to go over the motor and sensory pathways that you're supposed to know. And the motor and sensory pathways can be understood. First, you know that if it's sensory, the pathway is going up. If it's motor, the pathway is going down. So when you study nerve pathways, the basic idea is a nerve pathway is information sent through a chain of cells. The nerve pathway is info sent through chain of cells. I think I skipped the slide. Let me go back. This one. If it's an ascending pathway, the question is how many neurons does it take to reach the cerebral cortex? And here's another thing you may not know. If something is to reach your awareness, it must reach the outer edge of gray matter in your brain called the cerebral cortex.
For the sensory part?
Yeah. If something is to reach your awareness, if something is to reach your awareness, it must reach the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex in anatomy, the cerebrum is your brain, the cortex is the outer part, and it's gray matter. And there's an area of the cerebral cortex that's the primary somatosensory cortex, which is the primary sense where you feel your whole body. So all you got to do is study the chain of cells that go all the way up to your brain. And it's 3 cells, so you got to follow it from the, you have to follow it from the spinal cord all the way up. Let me do something here. Let's see here. So let's go from this slide to this slide, and these are the figures from the book I'll teach from. What I did was I labeled all the divisions that they show you. They're not showing you the entire central nervous system, just sections of it. For example, today we're learning about spinal cord. They have a picture of foot with lumbar, because I said the lumbar region controls the lower extremity. And so the hand is for the cervical region. The cervical region controls the upper extremity. This is all brain stem, and that's the brain on top. So the midbrain, cerebellum pons, medulla, are all midbrain structures, considered part of the central nervous section. So when I wrote this paragraph, where's the cerebral cortex on this figure? Well, there's the cerebrum, but the cerebral cortex is the outer gray matter right there. And that's where those nerve endings terminate. Now to get all the way up there, there are 3 cells. 1 cell, 2 cell, 3 cells. Okay, go all the way up there. Here's once again. Here's the first cell, terminates, synapse is right there. Here's the second cell, terminates right there. And there's the 3rd cell that projects to the cortex. So your job is to know how it gets all the way up there. So I'll outline that for you. You just follow it cell by cell. That's kind of my approach here. He's presenting it. So I'm going to use this my iPad here. And I'm going to zoom in so you can see where I'm going here. So here's the figure. I'm going to zoom in on the bottom there. so you can see the foot a little bit better on that figure. These pathways have names. The first one I'm going to show you are for the sensation of discriminative touch, and they're called the dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway. I'll write that on the board. The names of the sensory pathways. Sensation. Discriminative touch. The name of the pathway, dorsal column. Medial lemniscal pathway. So that's the name of the pathway, okay? And how the pathway is described in your book is how I'll describe it. You just follow it, first cell to the second cell to the third cell, ascending all the way up to the cerebral cortex, starting with the first order neuron. That's kind of what they call it. You could use hand or foot. I got it zoomed in on the foot, and you see how the feather tickling your foot, and you could feel that? That's discriminative touch. You could probably tell it's a feather tickling your foot. They have a picture of an encapsulated nerve ending. The signal goes into the central nervous system of the dorsal horn, and then it ascends. So the first order neuron, okay. So it goes in the dorsal horn, right? That's the gray matter of the spinal cord. And it's going to ascend on the same side that it enters. So let's say that's the left side. It's going to ascend on the same side. And the term for same side in this lecture is ipsilateral. Same side, whether it's the right side or the left side. Remember, before the break I said contralateral is opposite side. Side is left or right. Okay. You remember, I won't write it. Do you remember the term I said for crossover from right to left? Starts with a D. Decussate. We'll use that term again here. All right, so the first order, you're in the dorsal horn, then the signal, the pathway, it's going to ascend in the dorsal column, the white matter. So the dorsal horn is gray, but then the signal is going to ascend ipsilaterally in the dorsal column. So I'll just write that. So I'm going to write the description and you just follow the picture. So it goes in here, and this is going all the way up. So I'm going to have to move up here. Hold on a second. So I'm going to stop it right there in that picture. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. I could have said the same thing for the hand. That's proprioception, but see how it's going in, and it's using that dorsal column of white matter to go up. It's going to go all the way up here. Here is where it's going to end. This area is called the medulla. Okay. So I'll write for first order neuron. synapses in the medulla. It's going to synapse onto the second cell, the second order neuron. Any questions? Are you with me? Do you know what I'm doing? Where's the destination? Where are we trying to get to? The brain. Sometimes I've given this whole lecture and students will come to you the next day. I have no idea what that was. What is it? So, you know, you can just take notes, but as long as you're with me, I think you'll be okay. Do you see the synapse? That's the synapses in the medulla.
And that's in the white matter?
Well, it ascends in the white matter, but notice the synapses here in the gray matter? Okay. Yeah. It's going to synapse right there. The second order neuron is actually going to decussate in the medulla. It's going to ascend contralaterally. Okay, so write that. I think decussate is 1C. Decussates. Ascends contralaterally. So let's follow it all the way up. This should go all the way up to the thalamus, which is literally in between your brain. So it gets all the way to the thalamus where it synapses to the next cell, right there. So you notice how we're on the opposite side now? We started off on this side, now we're on the side opposite. Okay, so that's what I'm going to write. I'm writing synapses in thalamus. So then you get to the third order neuron. The third order neuron in the thalamus, it just projects to the correct area of the sensory cortex. Projects to the correct area of sensory cortex. That's that gray matter we're talking about. There's a part, every part of your body is topographically mapped out on this gray matter. Whether it's, you know, depending on what body part it is, but presuming you're projecting to the correct part that feels your hand or your foot, whatever it is. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back down. Let's see here. Let's zoom in on this one there. See that light-blue nerve pathway with the muscle spindle for proprioception? That's basically the one we're going to do next. That's the one I want you to know, for the sensation of proprioception. So I'm going to clear the board here.
So the first, second, and third order of this one was for the dorsal column?
That's right. That is right. The next sensation is proprioception. So they show you a muscle spindle there. This one, you, for the sensation and proprioception, you only have to get to the cerebellum, not the cerebrum. So you only need 2 cells, not 3 cells. They call these the spinal cerebellar pathways. So notice the first cell, the first order neuron, it's basically going to go in, it synapses immediately. The second cell will arise, ascend, I should say, ipsilaterally in the lateral column. Okay, so first cell. I'm writing enters dorsal horn. And synapses. Then you're already on the second order neuron. Second order neuron ascends ipsilaterally in the lateral white column, or just call it lateral column. It's going to go all the way up to where it needs to go, the cerebellum, which is literally behind the brain. In fact, some call the cerebellum the behind brain. It's going to go all the way up, and you can see where the second one ends. Right there in the cerebellum. This whole slice of nervous tissue right there is a combination of 2 things. I haven't taught this to you yet, but it's pons cerebellum. The pons is this part here. You can see how there's a line dividing pons from the cerebellum posteriorly. So all the gray matter out there is what I'm talking about. Okay. The cerebellum is for muscular activity. So coordinated movements like throwing a baseball. It's baseball season. All the actions involved in some complex motor movement is cerebellum. Okay. So I'm going to write projects directly to cerebellum, and you're done. So there's only 2 cells there, not 3. The third pathway I wanted to touch about was the pathway for pain and temperature. Those are the same nerve endings. I do a lab in 431 called the cold pressor test, where a subject immerses their hand in cold ice water. It's supposed to elicit a painful response in a safe way. You're supposed to get the blood pressure up because you're trying to elicit a fight or flight response in the lab. Well, anyways, it's extremely painful because it's so cold. So the nerve endings that sense pain also sense temperature. They're the same thing. So it's interesting. Students who are in extreme pain because of the cold, after a while, their nerves are so stimulated, so overstimulated, they can't tell the difference between cold and hot anymore. And it's like even though their hand is submerged in ice, they tell me it feels like it's burning. So that's why pain and temperature are together. It's the same pathway. So if you take me for 431, you can look forward to that. The cold pressor test. It's always a fun one. Okay, let's see. Pain and temperature. Now, pain and temperature, let's see here. Let's go back down there. We call it the spinal thalamic pathway. Let me get some water. Sorry. Ophthalmic pathway. So let's go with the one where they're burning the guy's foot. That's temperature, right? Well, pain and temperature, I guess, with a match. You can feel that heat. So the first order neuron in the dorsal horn, it's synapsing immediately. And what you see there is the second order neuron, it crosses over, it decussates. And I'm not writing it, but you can see it. To cross over, it's using those gray commissures I talked about before the break to get from one side, this side, to the other. Okay, that would be the anterior gray commissure. It's going from there to there. Okay, so it crosses over, it gets to the other side, it decussates, and it's going to ascend contralaterally in the lateral column. So if you follow that second one, the second order neuron will go all the way up to the brain. Let's follow it. There you go. So he goes all the way up to the thalamus, all the way up to thalamus. Some people call the thalamus the between brain. Well, anyways, that's where you have this synapse, and you get to the third order neuron. So I'll just put synapses. Done with that, and you get to the third order neuron. To the third one, it will then project to the cortex. Project to correct sensory cortex. So I've given you 3 sensory pathways to know. There's more. Those are the 3. Just worry about those 3. Now I passed out little red half sheets over there, and I have a bunch of half sheet questions here. And I want to get through these slides, and I have one line activity, but see these questions here on this slide? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Keep your half sheet, and as a homework assignment, answer these 1 through 11 on your half sheet, and you can turn it in next time. Right. Signing it as homework, because I'm looking at the time. I don't think we'll have class time to do it. I think it's better to do as homework so you can sit there and think about these questions for a long time, right? And study this stuff. What have I got up to 11? Okay, all of these pathways here, but I'm not done yet. I did sensor, I gotta do motor. There's 2 pathways for motor that I want you to know. For the motor pathways, I'll put a few pictures here. The picture I'm going to teach from primarily is on the right. And if it's a motor pathway, where does that start? It doesn't start in the body. For the sensory pathways, it started in the body because that's how you feel. That's how you're stimulated externally. And it goes up to your brain. If you want to issue a command, for example, voluntary movement, the command is issued from your brain. So you start here, and the information descends. So when I teach this, I'm going to start from here. I'm going to go down to the muscles. Here, what they show you is that you have cortex where you can feel your body, and they topographically illustrate the body parts that are felt in blue. And it's disproportionate. That's why it looks kind of funny. So notice face, hands, very sensitive areas have a lot of cerebral cortex dedicated to them for feel. For control, they use red, right? So you move your body parts, right? So that's the cortex that we're talking about now, the motor cortex. And information will ascend or descend. That's why when you study this picture, right there, if it's a slice of spinal cord and they color it blue, blue is what function? Motor or sensory?
Sensory.
It's sensory, so it's information going up or down. It's going up through those areas. And if it's red, it's going down. Okay, so that's why I threw all those in together. Okay, so let's look at this one. Start here. So what do they name these pathways? These pathways are called either lateral or ventral cortical spinal pathways. Those are the two I want you to know. Call this one ventral cortical spinal tract. So these are for, skilled, voluntary movements for motor command. Like what you're doing now, writing. It's considered a skilled, voluntary movement. Okay, there are two cells. There's upper and there's lower. Upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron. So let's start in the brain. And there's two cells there, a red one and a purple one. I'm going to teach the red one. The red one is the one that will descend in the ventral column there. Let me make sure I'm talking about the right one. Yeah, okay. So if you follow the red one, the red cell, it starts right there in the cerebral cortex, and I'm just going to go down from here, just follow this down, call it the upper motor neuron. It's going to descend through a few structures that I want you to know in the brain stem. It's descending through the cerebral peduncle of the midbrain. The cerebral peduncle is a part of the midbrain. The midbrain is part of your brain stem. Okay. Then it's going to go all the way down to the medulla and descend through their pyramids. So first midbrain, then descends through the pyramids of medulla. The medulla, the full name is medulla oblongata. It's the inferior-most part of the brain stem that's continuous with spinal cord, what we talked about today. Spinal cord, we'll start with C1, of course. Well, anyways, it's continuing down ipsilateral, the whole way down. So I'm just going to follow that red line all the way down. See how it's descending in the ventral column. Right there, it's descending through the ventral column. Descends through the ventral column in the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, it'll decussate and go to the other side, then synapse. Decussates, crosses over, then synapses. So the second cell is the lower motor neuron. And that's the one that exits and goes to the muscle. Lower motor neuron projects to, I'll say, innervates muscle. And notice that the lower motor neuron, the cell body, is in the ventral horn. That's what we talked about earlier in the lecture today. Okay. So yeah, upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron. This is the ventral cortical spinal tract. However, there's one more, and it doesn't change very much. So get this down. I'm just going to change a few key words. Okay. I realized learning this stuff, my son went to the dentist today. My wife sent me pictures. Learning this stuff to me was like, it's like going to the dentist. It's really hard. It's like pulling teeth. To get myself to learn it and get students to learn it. You just kind of like suffer through it, study it cell by cell till you got it down. Okay. Right, the other one is called the lateral cortical spinal tract. To make sense of this word, cortico, what do you think that refers to? Cortico, over the years I've come to realize, it refers to cortex. The cortex, does that mean inner or outer in anatomy? You got cortex medulla. Which one is outer? Cortex. Medulla always means inner part. If you look up the word meaning of medulla, it means pith. Pithy, deep inside. Well, anyways, cortex usually refers to the brain, and spinal refers to this tract is going to the spinal cord. So this pathway is really the same. The only difference is this is all the same. It descends through all these things. But when it gets to medulla, it doesn't descend ipsilaterally. It decussates at the medulla. So let me show that to you. It's the purple line. It's descending. And when it gets all the way down to medulla, it crosses over right there. That's the only difference. So what I'm going to do is begins here. Gets the medulla, then it decussates. Descends contralaterally, in the lateral white column. So then follow it down in the lateral white column. So I'm following the purple line. It's in the lateral white column. It's going to go all the way down. When it enters the correct level, it's going to synapse to an interneuron, and then it's done. So in spinal cord, synapse to an interneuron. And the interneuron will synapse to the lower motor neuron. Let me put a line so you can know that. And the lower motor neuron in this pathway will innervate the muscle there. And that's all right. Lower motor neuron. Innervate muscle. And that concludes the pathways you gotta know. I did write some questions for the cortical spinal tracts. So also on your half sheet 4 homework, answer 12 to 15. Answer 12, not 11, 12 as well. I'm referring to those questions there. After you've studied these pathways, you should be able to answer these questions quite easily, I think. We'll see. And we turn those in on Friday. But anyways, okay, let's look at these slides. I talked about that, talked about that, talked about that. I just included this picture. I like students who know, even though I teach motor and sensory separately, they're happening at the same time. Person taking notes, as you write, you feel yourself writing. There's feedback, motor and sensory, happening at the same time. One of the last topics I have is spinal cord trauma. These pathways are connected to the brain, but if you transect or have a lesion along the way, in any part of the spinal cord, you lose that communication. So if you transect the spinal cord at any level, it results in total motor and sensory loss in body regions. If you transect T1 to L1, that would cause, paraplegia, confined to a wheelchair maybe. However, if you transect in the cervical region, you may lose the function of all 4 limbs. That's called quadriplegic. The further down the injury, the less function that is lost. Paralysis refers to a loss of motor function. An acronym called FLAP is a more descriptive term when you lose function of the lower motor neurons. These are the ones that actually go to the muscle. If the muscle has lost the function of the motor neuron that innervates it, the lower one. FLAP stands for flaccid. The muscle loses its tone. Your muscles always have tone. Even when you're sitting, your quads still have tone, even though they're not in the state of contraction. But a muscle that's denervated is completely flaccid. There's no tone. You've lost voluntary control. Over time, because you're not using them, they atrophy. they waste away. And paralysis means you've lost control of that muscle in both limbs, on both sides. And so damage of the upper motor neurons may present differently. You have lots of lower motor neurons, they're on by themselves, so reflex activity should still be there. I mean, that's one of the things the doctor always tests for, right? The knee-jerk thing. If you have reflexes, the lower motor neuron is intact. But if the person can't wiggle their toes, the upper motor neurons, there's something wrong there. Okay? So you can't control them, all right? You have loss of voluntary control. You may have what's called a spastic paralysis. If the upper ones don't work, but the lower ones do, that constant spastic paralysis may make the muscles permanently shortened. Okay. And this kind of leads to a lab activity. I don't think we'll have time to do it today. I'm looking at the clock. So I'm just going to dismiss class. See you Friday. We'll do this lab activity on Friday. Remember to do your homework half sheet.